about time to read alicization. Yeah, no notifications. Okay. Where was I? Oh yeah, don't stop you. His momentary hesitation gone, Yujiro stared ahead. Kirito would never halt and give up that one silver of hope in this situation. He did what he said he would. Now it was Yujiro's turn. He practically flew up the stairs, passing the airborne body of his partner to the right. Once he was through the last remnants of floating fire, the landing and the Integrity Knight standing on it were right before him. Surely the knight wouldn't expect that one could escape his mighty perfect weapon control. Could escape his mighty perfect weapon control attack unscathed. His face was still hidden in the helmet, even at this range. But Yujiro could still, but Yujiro thought he could sense his surprise. There wasn't enough time for a second projectile. He had no sword, and he had allowed his foe to reach close quarters. Now you've lost, Yujiro thought triumphantly, raising the blue rose sword high. Toy with me not, boy, the knight bellowed, reading Yujiro's mind. Whatever momentary surprise he felt was gone, and pure fighting spirit enveloped the heavy reddish armor. He held his right hand high overhead, still clutching the burning longbow, and flame burst around his fist again. Ah! He screamed, hurling his fist toward the burning air. What now? Baby sir, why are you here? We need Mr. Ketchup, yeah, but he's dead, so you can't really have that. Yujiro was already in slicing range, but a series of calculations spun through his head at the speed of light. It was fist versus sword, so in terms of range and power, he had the advantage. But his opponent had the advantage of terrain. He was already very tall, and his fist was coming from an added height advantage from 3 extra steps. Could the slender blue rose sword withstand that kind of power? Should he dodge sideways, taking the landing, and attack again? No. Yujiro's friend and master in the Aincrad style had already once told him, in this world, what you put into your sword is critical. It's up to you to find what you infuse into your sword. Yujiro's tutor, Glorioso, Kirito's tutor, Sortolina, and even the arrogant and cowardly nobles, Mr. Ketchup and Mr. Mustard, had something that gave their swords added power. But Yujiro could sense that he was still in the process of finding that thing for himself. He had trained as much as anyone and learned a number of advanced techniques, but he still hadn't found what he can put into his sword to make that stand apart. He wasn't born to be a swordsman. Perhaps he would never find it. But at this moment, he couldn't submit to the Integrity Knight's intensity. Okay, let me start again. But at this moment, he couldn't submit to the Integrity Knight's intensity and allow his weapon to shrink back. The time for training and building his skill was gone. Now was the time to achieve his goal. Now was the time to take back the old Alice from her new Integrity Knight form. Alice. That was the only thing that mattered. He watched his friend get dragged away in chains that summer day 8 years ago, and now was the time to save her at last. All of his sword training and sacred arts knowledge was for this very moment. Please, give me your strength. I still have so much to learn. and might not be fit to own a sword of your pedigree. But I can't stop and pull back now. With the blue rose sword high, Yu-Gi-Oh twisted himself even further backward. The slightly translucent blade took on a brilliant blue glow. Okay. Why couldn't you just chill? Anyway, you are wearing sweatpants. No, I'm wearing warm-ups. With the blue rose sword high, Yu-Gi-Oh twisted himself even further backward. The slightly translucent blade took on a brilliant blue glow, donating no their warm-ups, donating denoting their warm-ups, denoting the Aincrad style vertical attack. Ah! He bellowed, and then he swung. The sword sizzled forward with that special sound unique to ultimate techniques and collided with the burning fist of the Integrity Knight. The shockwave of blue and red light fanned out, tearing the red carpet on the steps and the woven tape strides on the wall. Fist and sword came to a stop, connected in midair. The gauntlet and the flat of the blade creaked. Yu-Gi-Oh summoned all of his strength in the hopes of finishing the technique, but the knight's arm was as immobile as a boulder, though he did not seem to be overpowering the sword either. A low growl emerged from the helmet, and more weight was added to his fist. But the stalemate only lasted a few seconds. The flame coming from the congregation bow in the knight's hand started to lick at the blue rose sword. The light along the blade began to flicker, as if welting under the heat. If its vertical faltered, his sword would be knocked aside to give him a face full of burning fists. God. Yu-Gi-Oh summoned all of the strength and willpower he had in the attempt to swing through, but the flames only grew in strength. The blade began to heat up, turning red. Though he did not though he'd never been conscious of it before, the memories of the sword that he saw in the great library said that the blue rose sword had ice properties. That meant it should be weak to powerful flames, as its opposing element. If this continued for much longer, it could zap a dangerous amount of life from the weapon. On the on the flip side, the element of the sword meant it could possibly overcome the enemy's flames as well. The sword responded, wait, no, as well. You've been formed in the freezing storms at the peak of the End Mountains since the day of the world's creation. Don't let this cheap little fire melt you now, Yu-Gi-Oh screamed in his mind. The sword responded instantly, both his main hand on the grip and his left supporting the pommel felt a stinging chill. It wasn't just his imagination. The little roses carved into the guard were shrouded in white frost. The frost advanced, growing into little vines that crawled up the blade and scattered the flames licking at it. The phenomenon didn't stop there. The white vines of ice grew onto the knight's fist where the sword touched, banishing the flames that covered the red gauntlet and spreading more frost. the, the knight grunted, surprised at the sudden chill. The moment that Yu-Gi-Oh sensed his opponent's stance was faltering, he unleashed all his strength he'd been building up. With an ear-ripping squeal, the sword plunged forward and pushed the knight's left gauntlet back. Unfortunately, the tip just missed the enemy's body. As the sword descended through the air, the knight threw his empty right fist at Yu-Gi-Oh. It wasn't flaming like the other, but a solid blow from that rock-hard fist would easily knock him back to the base of the stairs. But Yu-Gi-Oh let out a fierce cry, and his sword leaped forward. Well, and his sword leaped upward. I even the even though well, even the blurriest of men couldn't perform an instantaneous reversal of momentum with strength alone. Not when the blue rose sword was heavier than a steel sword of the same size. Only a sword fighting technique could achieve such an effect. The Aincrad style's two-part attack, vertical arc. The blade traced a figure like the sacred art's rune V, slicing into the knight's breastplate at an edge. A small amount of red liquid sprayed from the gash in the dark red metal. The tip of his sword had tasted flesh, but not only a bit, but only a bit. The knight swayed backward, but he tensed his legs to leap away. If Yu-Gi-Oh let the enemy gain any distance, it would give him a chance to repeat the flame attack again. But all of the Aincrad style's ultimate techniques left the user immobile for several seconds after finishing. Kirito told him that if he was going to use them, he always had to consider how he would make up for that massive period of weakness. If the attack landed effectively, it wasn't an issue. But if it was blocked or deflected, or, as in this case, it landed but didn't fully stop the opponent, he would be open to the risk of a fatal counterattack. The, immola- the, Im- the immobilization of a technique was absolute. No amount of mental fortitude could lessen it. The only ways to minimize the risks were tricks like having an al uh, messed up there. And Kirito told him that if he was going to use them, he always had to consider how he would make up for that massive period of weakness. If the attack landed effectively, it wasn't an issue. But if it was blocked or deflected, or, as in this case, it landed but didn't fully stop the opponent, it would be open to the risk of a fatal counterattack. The immobilization of a technique was absolute. No amount of mental fortitude, fortitude could lessen it. The only ways to minimize the risks were tricks like having an ally step in afterward, or unleashing prepared wind elements to blow the enemy further further away, and so on. But Kirito had fallen back down into the antechamber, and there hadn't been time to chant any sacred arts. There was only one way left. Yu-Gi-Oh summoned all the muscle and willpower he had to control the movement of the Blue Rose sword along the route of the second half of its vertical arc. Normally, it would end up high to the left, but instead he brought it back so it could practically rest on his left shoulder, forcing the blade aside, causing the blue light surrounding it to diminish rapidly. But the attack was essentially far from over. Well, the attack was essentially over anyway. Just as the blue rose sword came to a stop over his shoulder, the enemy knight leaped into motion. The landing of the staircase was spacious, and if he retreated toward the back wall, he could likely prepare another flaming lance while Yugio was paralyzed. If Yugio let that happen, he could not defend against it. The only way to overcome the only way to overcome the momentarily par- paralysis was to switch one ultimate skill into the other. If the posture at the end of the attack matched the activation of another, it could it could activate smoothly without causing any delay. This ultimate art of skill combination was so difficult, even Kirito could only pull it off half the time. Yugio belted hot breath, and focused as hard as he could on activating the new technique. The sword shone brightly and bolted forward as if struck. The sword ruled. Oh, 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 Nani? The sword shone brightly. His body bolted forward as if struck, and the sword roared forward from the upper left toward the Integrity Knight. It was the singular move slant. At last the knight's eyes bulged. I'm gonna call it that. The pain in Yugio's right eye and the rotating red scattered sacred letters from when he tried to attack Rios was gone. There was no feeling of doubt, no hesitation whatsoever. Yugio's entire being was driven by only one thought: to slice the foe before him. The blue rose sword struck the Integrity Knight directly on the right shoulder. The shoulder guard was split, followed by a dull, heavy impact that traveled up to Yugio's hand. It was the sensation of the sword in his hand splitting muscle and flesh to crush bone. The Integrity Knight was slammed directly to the floor on his back, wounded deeply from shoulder to breast. He gasped, voice muffled by the helmet. Then took a spray of then a spray of blood redder than his armor burst from the neck of his suit. This was the second time Ryujo had slashed a man, and he still felt his breath catch in his throat for a moment. The sensation in his right hand caused something to clutch at the pit of his stomach, but he did his best to suppress it. In a kind of coordination with Yugio's emotions, the blue rose sword ex- the blue rose sword gave off frost again, turning all the blood on it into ice that vanished, leaving it clean. In fact, the wound of the knight's shoulder was also white with frost now. The collected drops of blood hardening into little icicles. The knight grunted, lifting his right hand with the bow toward his wound. Yugio clutched his sword even harder again. If the Integrity Knight started some kind of sacred arts, he would have to strike him again. An experienced caster could heal himself with all the available resources in the vicinity, and the only ways to stop him were to attack his throat, cut off his arm, or perhaps ending his life altogether. But the knight's left fist was totally frozen, and when he realized that he could not even let go of the bow, he gave up on healing himself. Heat based sacred arts required fine finger movement to execute. Instead, he exhaled in char- chagrin, chagrin, and dropped his arm heavily to the floor. Yujo wasn't sure what to do next. The Blue Rose Sword's ice effect stopped the enemy's flames in its tracks, but it also sealed the wound and stopped the bleeding. The knight couldn't attack back for now, but he couldn't die. But he wouldn't die either. If left here, his hand would eventually thaw, and then he could heal himself and possibly continue pursuing them. All could do was to stand in place and grit his teeth in indecision. It was the knight who spoke first. Boy, even in a rasp, his voice lost no his voice lost none in its commanding presence. Yujio tensed at first, until he heard what came next. Are you going outside? I guess that's a yeah. What is the name of the first technique you used? Yujio hesitated at first, then opened his pursed lips to answer. The Aincrad style two-part combination, vertical arc. Two parts, the knight repeated, pausing, then asked, and you, what did you use? His helmet creaked, and for an instant, Yujio looked behind him. There was Kirito, black clothes sinned here and there, holding his left arm and dragging his right foot as he slowly ascended the stairs. Kirito, are you hurt? His partner grinned weakly. I'm fine. I took care of the worst burns, Sir Knight. What I performed was an Aincrad style defensive maneuver, spinning shield. The knight looked up at the ceiling, helmet clanking, and fell silent. When he spoke again after several seconds, it seemed to be directed at himself rather than Yujio or Kirito. I've been from one edge of the human world to the other, and even seen what lies beyond. But now I've learned that there are techniques and styles in the world that are yet unfamiliar to me. I can sense that there is true discipline and experience in your style. When I accused you of using defiled arts to lead Eldry astray, it seems that I was mistaken. His helmet creaked again. His helmet creaked again as he turned to stare at Yujio from the helmet. Tell me your names. Yujio glanced at Kirito, then said, Yujio the swordsman. I have no second name. I'm Kirito the swordsman. The knight nodded, savoring the sound, and then, to their surprise, said, Several integrity knights are awaiting you in the great hall of ghostly light on the 50th floor of the cathedral. They are under the orders to obliterate your life rather than take you alive. However, so if you attempt to challenge them directly, they'll instantly destroy you. Whoa, buddy. Should you really be telling us that? Kirito interjected. But the knight seemed to grin, as far as could be seen with his helmet on, and muttered,
You come with me?
Having failed to fulfill my duty by administrator, my knight's armor and weapon will surely be confiscated. No, get him!
Oh.
Will surely be confiscated, and I will undergo an internal freezing. So before I suffer that ignominious fate, I would prefer that you end my life yourselves. Kirito and Yujiro could not respond. The knight continued. There is no reason to hesitate. You defeated me through skill and boldness and fair combat. But any surprise Yujiro had felt was soon washed away by his formal introduction. My name is just Soulbright, since of this seven. It was more than just familiar. It was the name. That was a name that had been etched deep into Yuji's soul for the past 8 years. A name he could never forget for an instant. A name that conjured up regret, despair, and anger. This soul, but you, you were the knight who. To his own ears, Yuji's hoarse voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. The color of the armor was different, and the metallic muffling of the voice through the helmet had given away nothing. But he understood that the knight on the floor before him was the very one who. Yujio staggered forward, compelled. Yujio? Said Kirito. But the brown-haired boy hardly even heard it. He leaned over to look at the face through the helmet visor. There was some kind of enchantment on the helmet because there because from just a few sins away, the knight's face was still hidden in darkness. But even after the loss of so much of his life value, his two eyes were clearly visible, having lost none of their force. They were sharp and bold and could have belonged to either a young man or an experienced one. Yujio's voice creaked out from his perched throat. In your life? Fair combat? His right hand splemished violently, and the sword clutched in it began to vibrate cold once again. The armor right under the tip began to freeze over and white. The armor right under the tip began to freeze. A bowl of furious hot rage swelled up inside him, and he forced it out with one rip-throating yell. You shackled a girl who was only 8 years old, and chained her to the foot of a dragon, and you think you have the right to take the honorable way out? He held up the blue rose sword in reverse and pointed down. He would ram it through the knight's mouth in his unforgivable words. He would ram it through the night. He would ram it through that knight's mouth in his unforgivable words, right down to the floor. It could have been done with it, and would be done with it. But a heavy, wincing pain stayed his hand. The pain that didn't come from his right eye, but somewhere deep in his chest. It was the pain of someone, somewhere, desperately trying to stop him. He stood there, sword raised, entire body trembling with emotion, until Kirito reached over to put his hand on Yujio's arm. What? Why are you stopping me, Kirito? He grounded out to his partner, the person he trusted more than anyone in the world, as he grappled with the milestone of emotion that threatened to consume his entire sense of reason. Kirito stared back at him with eyes full of pain and slowly shook his head. This man doesn't intend to fight anymore. You shouldn't use your sword on someone who won't fight. But, but he took the one who was Alice away. Ichiro protested, like a sulking child. But a part of him knew that Kirito was right. The Integrity Knights were beings who acted entirely on the commands of the Aximon Church, the Pontifex herself. It was the church and the twisted laws and order that the ruled over. That it was the church and the twisted law and order that ruled over the world that took Alice away. But even taking a step back did not rim him of the impulse to forget about all about the truth and simply sliced the prone knight to pieces. Learning the way the world really worked didn't simply wipe clean the years of anger, powerlessness, and guilt that had built it up since that fateful summer day. A woven basket at his feet, bread and cheese lying in the sand, ice melting in the sun. The dull shine of the chains that bound Alice's blue dress, and his 2 feet as immobile as if they'd grown roots on the spot. Kirito, Kirito, if you had been there, you would have attacked the knight to save Alice, if that's what it took. You would have done it, even though you'd be arrested and subjected to interrogation, too. But I couldn't do that. Alice was my only true friend, the girl that I cared about more than anyone else. And all I could do was watch. All I could do was watch us this night on the ground here, tied her up and took her away. His mind was a storm, fragments of emotion and thoughts coming and going. His arm trembled in Kirito's grasp and lifted the sword even higher. But what Kirito said next was stunning enough that it succeeded at stopping Yujio. I don't think he remembers that. He doesn't remember taking your Alice away from Ruid, and not because he forgot, but the memory was erased. Huh? Stunned, Yujio looked down at the knight's helmet. The Integrity Knight, who hadn't budged once, even with the sword held over his head, finally moved. His left fist, thawed at last, peered itself open and let go of the long bow in a stray of little ice shards. He reached up to undo the fastening of his helmet. The menacing metal sculpture split in a front and back, then clattered free from the knight's head. It revealed the fierce, stern face of a man who appeared to be around 40. He had close cropped hair and thick brows, though both are burnished red color like rust. The bridge of his nose and the line of his mouth were straight and proud, and his eyes were as sharp as steel arrowheads. But those dark eyes were wavering, betraying an internal struggle. Betraying an internal struggle. His thin lips parted to produce a deep, rich voice that sounded nothing like what had came through the helmet. This black-haired boy is correct. You claimed I chained a young girl and brought her here by dragon? I do not remember such a thing. You don't remember? It was only 8 years ago. Kirito, not Kirito, Yujio murmured, stunned. The temptation drained from his arm. Kirito removed his hand from Yujio and put it to his chin, thinking hard. This is why it was erased, along with everything before and after. Hey, Guy, Sir Salbert, were you the Integrity Knight in charge of protecting the north border of North Garland? Of Were you in charge of protecting the north border of North Landgardof? Indeed, indeed, North District 7 was under my was why do they keep using complicated words? Indeed, North District 7 was under my watch up until 8 years ago, the knight said, his brow frowning just as he derided up memories. And then, in recognition of my feats, I was given this armor and placed in a security role at the Cathedral. And do you remember what the feat were? And do you remember what feat it was? Kirito asked. The knight did not answer immediately. He pursed his lips, and his eyes wandered. After a short silence, Kirito continued. I'll tell you why. Your feat was finding the integrity knight Alice Synthesis 30 from a tiny little foreigner hamlet in the far north that no one in Centauria would have known about. Administrator gave you credit for bringing Alice to this tower, but also had to remove your memories of the event. And you just explained the reason why. At some point, Kirito had stopped talking to Yujiro, and the night, and at some point, Kirito had stopped talking to Yujiro in the night, and seemed to be laying out his argument for himself as his speech accelerated. You said that the Integrity Knights had no past, because you were summoned from heaven. I'm sure that's what the Pontifex told you just after you woke up as a knight, in order to convince you that you had no memories before then. But in order to maintain that story, there had to be no memories, not just of your humanity, but of the birth of other knights. After all, there would be chaos if the sinner you brought to justice showed up as an integrity knight the next day. I suppose that might actually be the Pontifex's biggest weakness. Kirito looked down, pacing left and right, pondering at a rapid pace. This outburst by his partners sapped the momentum of Yukio's fury. He looked down at the man at his feet again. This sober's face was simply vacant as he considered these ramifications. His anger and hatred were gone, but if Kirito was correct that of the man's memories of Alice had been erased, but then Yujiro just had to accept this strict state of things, that all the Integrity Knights were merely pawns of this administrator at the center of the Axamon Church. The true enemy who stole Alice from them and turned her into a knight and erased her memories was none other than the administrator. The soulbird, sensing Yujiro's gaze upon him, stopped glancing around. It was impossible to tell what exact emotions were swirling within the older man. But when his voice emerged at last, it wavered with a weakness that would be unthinkable from the opposing figure they faced in battle. That cannot be. The Integrity Knights could have been humans like you before our knighting. Yeah, that was your fault. Yujiro was at a loss for words. Instead, Kirito spoke to him. Kirito spoke to him. The blood from your wound is the same red as ours. And Eldry wasn't acting strange because we cast some wicked art on him. It was because we were trying to make him remember the memories that were taken from him. And you are no different from him. I don't know whether you won the Four Empire Unification Tournament or committed some act according to the Taboo Index, but in either case, Administrator took important memories of yours, forced absolute royalty to the church into your soul, and turned you into an integrity knight. Whether this freezing punishment... You see, you're doing this to yourself. Whatever this freezing punishment is, I'm certain that administrator will just tinker with your memories again, or erase this conversation. I'd bet on it. His phrasing was cold, but there was a kind of helpless frustration in Kirito's voice, too. Picking up on that, the knight closed his eyes and eventually shook his head. I cannot believe, I cannot believe that the holy Pontifex would do such a thing to me. But it's the truth. There must be something still left in you, a precious memory before you became a knight, that no sacred arts could wipe from your mind. De Salbert lifted his left hand, stared at the thick, strong fingers, and exhaled. From the time I came to Earth, I had the same dream over and over, of a small hand rocking me awake, and a silver ring on its finger. But when I wake, there is no one there. His eyes frowned, and he pressed hard against his forehead. Kirito watched him solemnly, then murmured, I don't think you can remember any of that any more of that than that. I don't think you can remember any more than that. Administrator stole your memories of whoever owned that ring. He paused, then returned the black sword to his hand in his hand to the sheath at his left side with a soft clink. What you do next is up to you. You can return to administrator and receive your punishment, heal up and chase after us, or Kirito left the final option unsaid and took a few steps toward the next flight of stairs in the right ending of the landing. He paused there and looked over at his shoulder, straight at Yujiro. His black eyes were saying, Isn't that better? Ryujio glanced down at the brawny knight, Integrity Knight, whose eyes were closed, and lifted his blue rose sword, then pointed the tip at his sheath and slid it home. Let's go, he said, pulling even with Kirito. They began to climb together. Whatever choice the starboard Synthesis 7 made, it seemed unlikely that he would pursue them after this. And I'm just going to end it at chapter 2.